Hello, and thank you for watching this video. This is Ryan Gerdes with the Recon Group. I wanted to go over some bullet points of the residential purchase contract here in the greater Phoenix area. So without further ado, let's get into it. The first page that you're going to see is an attention buyer page. This is kind of a table of contents, just going through what we have to look forward to in regards to inspections and disclosures, so on and so forth. The idea is whenever you see anything that is in bold print, it's probably a pretty good idea to pay close attention to it. So I'm going to kind of move through the contract here, as you can see, and get down to the first page of the actual contract itself. So here on page 1, we have the buyer's information. Make sure your name is spelled correctly. The seller's information. Make sure your name is spelled correctly. And then also the premises addresses and legal description. It's kind of how the government deciphers where your home is. And then the premise address would be your mailing address. The full purchase price will go right here. Your earnest money will go right here. Earnest money is money that you put up front, and you deposit that if you are a buyer with the escrow company. And they kind of hold on to it to make sure that that everything is being played fairly, so that the seller themselves aren't personally holding on to it and holding it hostage. We might also have a summary right here on lines 12 and 13, identifying additional down payments or loan programs and the amount of money right here, so that it's easy for everyone to see what the intent is as far as the finances go. More often than not, we are going to have a personal check for earnest money, and more often than not, we are going to have the escrow company holding on to the cash itself. The close of escrow period, generally, we have a 30-day inspection, or I'm sorry, escrow period, and we like to close sometime during the week, usually in the middle of the week, and we'll get a little bit more into that as we discuss. Possession. When you hear the terms funded and recorded, then you'll know that it has officially changed hands from seller to buyer. That's when the keys will actually be handed over. Additional addendums will be things such as the HOA, a buyer contingency, or if there's a septic on the property, an on-site wastewater treatment. So you can kind of get an idea of some options here as far as what possible addendums will be incorporated. And if you have any questions about those specific addendums, please reach out to your wealth manager and we can explain in further detail. So that is page 1. Moving on to page 2, the top of the page, we are discussing fixtures. So the idea is that anything that is attached to the property, installed, glued down, or somehow attached to the property, it will stay with the property. Anything that is sitting loosely about will be considered personal property, with the exception of this guy right here. Wall-mounted TVs will not convey unless otherwise detailed in the contract. However, the mounting equipment itself will stay with the property. The common misconception is that refrigerators, washers, and dryers are considered appliances, which they are not. They are considered personal property. However, if it is being offered with the property, it will be outlined in these lines right here, 56 through 58. Any other personal property will not be considered as far as value goes to the contract, so those will generally be written as a separate bill of sale. Financing. Likely by this point you'll have already gone through a pre-qualification process with your lender. Loan contingencies. This is kind of an area that we are discussing. The status of your loan, making sure that you're not going out and buying a new car or establishing new credit, going and spending any money frivolously that will affect your down payment or your assets. And then also, just as a little side note, making sure that there's no changes in employment. Interest rates. If for some reason or another interest rates were to spike between the time of contract and the time that you lock your loan, and you are no longer eligible for the loan because of interest rate hikes, that will be an area where you can cancel the contract and ultimately get your earnest money back. It's just a safety net there for unforeseen market conditions. Loan status update. As a buyer, you are responsible for keeping everyone up to date on the status of your loan. Fortunately for us, our preferred vendors and lenders that we work with are really good about getting us loan status updates on a weekly basis. Moving on to page 3, still discussing financing. Loan application essentially is saying that you need to make sure that you have your loan application with the lender in within 3 days of the contract. Likely you are not at this point if you haven't already done so. Loan processing during escrow. This is essentially saying that you need to be Johnny on the spot whenever it comes to providing any documentations over to the lender to make sure there are no delays. Types of financing will be discussed right here, whether you're doing conventional FHA, VA, or cash, kind of just letting everyone know what it is your intent is. Loan costs. These are costs that are incurred by the lender, and they are, as the boilerplate of this contract goes, on the responsibility of the buyer. If we are offering to have the seller help the buyer out with any of these loan costs, they will be outlined right here. Changes. If there are any changes to the loan program or to the lender itself, you may do so. However, it cannot affect the terms and conditions of the contract, nor may it affect the underlying proceeds to the seller. If any of those changes are made, you must get permission from all parties. Appraisal contingency. This is saying that the property is contingent on the appraisal coming back at value without conditions. So if the property comes in low, then there's a potential chance of renegotiations. You have several different options as a buyer. You can either A, back out of the contract, get your earnest money back. B, the seller can reduce the price to the appraised value. Or C, you can have negotiations where maybe the buyer comes up with additional funds above the appraisal value in order to meet the conditions of the negotiations. Appraisal costs, they are generally going to fall on the buyer, and they will generally not be applied towards seller concessions. However, it is negotiable. Title and escrow. This is the neutral third party that will be handling all funds, and they will also be conveying the deed to the property from the seller over to the buyer upon closing. Title investing. Per the outlined information here for the escrow company, they will be giving advice to the buyer on how they wish to take title upon close of escrow. Title commitment and title insurance. This ensures that after the buyer closes on the property, that if, let's just say, for example, a year down the road, somebody shows up to their doorstep, knocks on their door and says, hey, I installed a roof on this property 5 years ago, and you owe me $5,000 because it was never paid. At that point, the buyer can just show them a copy of their title insurance and say, take it up with the previous owner or the title company because I have a clear bill of sale, and that is not my responsibility. Right. Moving on to page 4. If there are any additional instructions, let's just say that additional funds need to be wired over, or maybe a trade line needs to be paid off upon close of escrow, you would simply just let the title company know in writing any additional instructions. Tax prorations. This is saying that you as a buyer will be responsible for paying taxes from the day that you own the property until the day you sell the property. Release of earnest money. In the most ideal situation, the earnest money will be released back to the buyer upon successful close of escrow, crediting them with the earnest money so that, let's just say, for example, it costs $10,000 to close the transaction, but there's $5,000 in earnest money. At that point, the buyer would only need to come up with another additional $5,000 because they had that $5,000 earnest credit. prorations of assessment and fees if the property was a rental or if there's any outstanding homeowners association fees. Again, just like taxes, the buyer will be responsible for payment of everything from the day they own it till the day they close. And if there's any rental overages, those will be credited to the buyer as well. Assessment liens. This means you're going to be getting a clear bill of sale. And any assessments that the buyer would be responsible for would be the ones that they've incurred themselves, i.e. a mortgage. Seller property disclosure statement. Now, this contract requires that a seller disclose anything and everything that they know that might be an adverse condition to the property. It's a long laundry list of questions that they go through to discuss plumbing, electrical, HVAC, foundation, roof, you name it, it's on there. Insurance claims history. This is what we call in the business a clue report. This is simply an insurance claims history report that goes over the past 5 years that the seller must disclose over to the buyer. Foreign sellers, more often than not, we will not see this apply, but it is something that we face on somewhat of a frequent basis. If the seller is not from America, then they're going to be required to have certain assets that are available to ensure that taxes are paid correctly on American soil. Lead-based paint disclosure. This has to do with any home that's built in 1978 or earlier. So if it was built in 1978 or earlier, just know that there is a possible risk of having lead-based paint present on the property. So we recommend that nobody go chew on the walls or do anything that might ingest or put lead-based paint airborne for the safety of everyone that is occupying the premises. On to the next page. Affidavit of Disclosure. This is very uncommon. However, if there are any type of HOA or covenants and restrictions on a remote area of 5 or few parcels, then an affidavit of disclosure may apply. Changes during escrow. Now we're still talking about disclosures here. Let's say, for example, a monsoon comes through in the month of July and does a bunch of roof damage on a property during the escrow process. In that scenario, a seller would be required to bring the roof back to its original or better condition while also disclosing to the buyer. Warranties. The boilerplate of this contract expresses that a seller is not going to move into the contract with the agreement that they're going to make any changes. So for all intents and purposes, this contract states that the property is going to convey in as is. However, that does not mean that you as a buyer are foregoing your inspection period and your due diligence process. Warranties that survive closing. In the event that a buyer would find any adverse conditions that were not disclosed or that were not found upon inspection after they've closed on the property, then there would still be some responsibility from the buyer to come back and repair any adverse conditions and make sure that it was disclosed. Buyer warranties. This is simply saying that there's no such thing as a verbal contract. Everything in writing is going to trump anything that you may have heard or that you may have read or anything that you may have heard through the grapevine. Due diligence. This is discussing the inspection period. So the boilerplate of this contract states that we have 10 days after the contract is executed to inspect the property, cross all the T's, dot all the I's. There is a buyer advisory that we submit with all of our offers that you are going to have that's basically just a library of information. If you have any questions about fire, about police, about shopping, schools, or anything related to the neighborhood, go ahead and use that buyer advisory as a resource to do any of that homework. During your inspection period, you as the buyer are going to be responsible for verifying square footage. You're also going to want to get what's called a wood-destroying organism inspection report, or for short, a termite report. Flood hazard. It will be on you to verify with not only your insurance company, but for your own personal purposes to make sure that there are no flood hazards associated with the property. Moving on to page 6. We highly advise that you reach out to your insurance provider as soon as possible to make sure that the property is insurable to your satisfaction. Sewer and on-site treatment system. If it is on septic, this line right here will be selected. If it is connected to a public sewer system, this will be selected. But also your inspector will be able to verify that information as well. If the property has a swimming pool, we highly advise that you do have a fence around the pool along with self-closing, self-latching doors that access the pool area. It is not required in the state of Arizona to have pool barriers. However, we do highly advise. You're going to see in some bold print right here between lines 252 and 258. Essentially, this is a disclosure to the buyer and to the seller that your wealth manager and real estate representation, we are not qualified inspectors, nor are we CPAs or anything under that scope. So we highly advise that you're part of that process and ask as many questions as you possibly can to your inspector to ensure the competency and ensure that you're comfortable with the performance of the inspection. All right, inspection period notice and buyer disapproval. During that 10 days, we are going to go everything with a fine-tooth comb. Upon that 10-day inspection period, or when we give notice, we call it a buyer's inspection notice seller response. On that form will be 3 different options. Option number 1, you will accept the property as is. And option number 2, you do not like the property, you wish to cancel the contract and get your earnest money back. Option number 3, we provide the seller with the opportunity to perform some remedies to the property that we have found during the inspection period. Essentially, it's a potential second wave of negotiations with the seller. All right, moving through to page 7, home warranty plan. We at the Recon Group highly advise that you constantly keep a home warranty policy on your property. Consider it like a second insurance policy on the home that covers mostly mechanical items, such as air conditioning, appliances, garbage disposals, things of that nature. Walkthroughs. The seller must make the property available for the inspector to access everything. This is most common in like a garage area where there might be a lot of personal property that might be obstructing access over to a water heater, for instance. So this area simply says the seller must make the property available to the inspector to perform an inspection on those items. Seller responsibility regarding inspections and walkthroughs. They must make the property available for us to access. IRS and FERPTA reporting. This is simply saying that Uncle Sam will find out about this transaction, and you as a buyer are going to have some pretty fantastic tax benefits because of this. Remedies. Okay. This is the what if portion of the contract. So what if a buyer or a seller does something that breaches the contract? In that event, the other party must give the buyer or the seller the opportunity to correct those items, and they give it using a cure period notice, which provides the other party 3 days in order to comply. If that does not happen in that 3-day period, then we have an official breach of contract. From there, we always like to sit down and talk it out, see if we can't figure it out verbally. If that doesn't work, then we will get brokers involved. If that doesn't work, we will talk to the title company and have their legal team weigh in on it. If that doesn't work, then at that point you can either cancel the contract if the other party is breached, or you might decide to seek legal counsel at that point. Understand that if you seek legal counsel, he who loses or she who loses will be responsible for paying all attorney's fees, not only for themselves, but for all parties involved. All right, moving forward, page 8. This is the portion of the contract that allows us to manually write in any other terms and conditions that we would like to add to the contract. Moving on to page 9. Page 9 is going to be a plethora of kind of one-off situations or additional terms and conditions. Risk of loss. Let's go back to that storm that came through in July and did all that roof damage. If the damage to the roof is at 10% or in excess of that to the property, then buyer or seller has the ability to cancel the contract, walk away as friends, shake hands. Unfortunately, we have some acts of God that happen out there that is no one's fault. It's just unfortunate, and sometimes we need to move away. Permission. This allows the seller to let everyone know that the property is under contract. Arizona law. This is a legally binding contract. Time is of the essence. If you say that you're going to do something and you put it in writing, get it done ASAP. Compensation. The compensation to a buyer will be the real estate premises and real property itself. The compensation to everybody else will be American currency. Copies and counterparts. Any other form of negotiations in conjunction with this contract will not be considered a separate contract. This will be one body. Furthermore, most of the time, we are doing these contracts and copies as well as electronic signatures. They are all admissible. Days. This contract does not recognize holidays, weekends, or anything like that. When we're talking about days on here, everything will be referred to in calendar days. Calculating time periods. Although we don't recognize weekends and holidays, we must understand that we cannot close on a weekend or a federal holiday. Banks and title companies are not open. So you're always going to see a close of escrow date fall on actual business day. Again, this is an entire agreement, not any separate contracts. Subsequent offers. The seller is still allowed to market the property even after we go under contract. However, this contract will remain in first position. So any other offers and contracts that the seller entertains will be second, third, or whatever respective position that they're in. Should this contract be canceled for whatever reason, it must be done so in writing. Notice. It is simply saying that whenever there is a notice that goes out to buyer, seller, or any other party to the contract, it must be done so in writing. You're going to see another paragraph here from lines 428 to 434 in bold print. This is simply saying that we, as your wealth managers and as a brokerage, are not going to take responsibility for the condition of the property or anything that is out of our control, basically. Terms of acceptance. This is where the buyer would submit the offer and give the seller a specific time to respond by. At that point, if it is not responded to by this time period, then the offer has expired and is potentially voidable. However, it can be resurrected with either an addendum or a counteroffer that extends those time periods. All right, moving on to page 10. This will be where there's the pedigree of all the buyer's agent's information or the selling agent. And here's a little bit of agency confirmation here, connecting the buyer to the agent. This will be the pedigree of the buyer, right here, lines 453 through 456. And then under seller acceptance, this will be the agent's or the listing agent's pedigree. their agency relationship. If the seller wishes to counter, they will check this box and then provide a separate document for their counteroffer. And here under seller's signature at lines 469 through 472, this will be the seller's pedigree. And that, my friend, is the entire real estate residential purchase contract. If you have any questions, we highly urge you to reach out to your wealth manager and ask any specific questions that you have. But hopefully, this will have taken you through the most important points in layman's terms, the boilerplate of the contract. Thank you so much for listening, and we wish you the best of luck, and thank you so much for your business.